Hello and welcome to a special program on TRT World. I'm Adnan Nawaz. This is a town hall discussion on the status of NATO, the world's biggest military alliance. And this year, the NATO summit will be in Ankara, and that's where we find ourselves, in the Turkish capital, at a place called Atakule, right in the heart of the city, overlooking the botanical gardens, in the same neighborhood where many international embassies are based. We have a panel of experts with us. We also have a small audience who'll get their chance to ask questions. One of the big themes of this year's NATO summit is unity. Why? Because President Donald Trump has told the European members of this alliance, of which there are 30, that they need to take more responsibility for their own security and their own defense. That means increased troop deployments, increased defense spending. That's one of his big complaints about this alliance. So we're going to have to get to the bottom of how these European nations are going to meet that challenge that Washington has laid down. And the most important point here is the US is the ultimate guarantor of NATO. Well, let's start by introducing our panel. Let's go from left to right. We have Vebi Baysan, who is a historian, a professor at Ibn Khaldun University. We have Professor Nancy Snow, who, by her own admission, is a master of many arts. Nancy, it's great to see you. You're a professor of communications. You're actually the distinguished visiting professor of mediation and science diplomacy at Bashkent University. So maybe you can call Istanbul your home for a while. We have Matthew Breiser, a former ambassador to the United States, to Azerbaijan, but also former Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Eurasia and Europe, correct? And we have from the SETA think tank, which is based here in Istanbul, Tunç Demirtas, who's a researcher at SETA. To give you the English version of that acronym, it's the Foundation for Political, Economic and Social Research. And also, audience, thank you so much for being with us here on this lovely evening in Ankara. It was so hot earlier today, we decided to delay recording so we will all be more comfortable. But let's make you a bit uncomfortable to start with, Matthew.
Sure.
Unity is meant to be at the core of NATO. It wasn't that long ago, just a few months, that Donald Trump posited the idea that possibly Spain should be thrown out of the alliance. There was uproar within NATO. And now they're coming to Ankara. How are they going to find this unity?
Well, it's a great question, Adnan, because NATO is all about Article 5, which says one for all for one. An attack on one is an attack on all. And the fundamental premise of nuclear deterrence that is at the core of Article 5 is in some ways not rational at all. If in those days the Soviet Union had used nuclear weapons or had attacked, let's say, Paris, the premise was that the United States would respond with nuclear weapons against the Soviet Union, which would prompt a nuclear destruction of Washington or Chicago or New York. So that's a difficult premise to believe is really going to be implemented in the case of war, because once the war's begun, you don't want to lose your own city. So unity is essential to maintaining the credibility of that promise to come to Europe's aid if it's attacked, by the United States. So when President Trump talked about Spain leaving or being kicked out of NATO, which by the way is not possible, no country can be kicked out of NATO. Nonetheless, he's showing that, well, maybe that transatlantic bond whereby the US guarantees retaliation to deter is weak. Similarly, when President Trump was saying, well, okay, Greenland might be part of NATO member state Denmark, but even though we're sworn to protect Denmark, maybe we'll use military force against Denmark to gain Greenland. So those statements by President Trump have really weakened not just the unity of NATO, but the whole premise that the US would be there, perhaps suffering nuclear retaliation in defense of its own NATO allies.
It was also quite incredible when President Trump said that basically what Greenland has got is a sled and 2 dogs to protect itself. Sometimes the language that he uses promotes disunity. Vebi, have you ever known in history the question being asked so concertedly, which Emmanuel Macron was thinking about in 2019 when he said that NATO is becoming brain dead? One of the reasons he said that was that he himself was not sure that the US under President Trump in his first term would remain as NATO's ultimate guarantor. And obviously, as Matthew has said, that guarantee comes from the US might that its military possesses.
Well, if we look at it historically, the world paid a very heavy price looking at the Great War, World War One, actually there was no mechanism to stop it or to deter nations, and then it repeated itself. Let's remember in the World War II, I mean, it happened again, and millions of people lost their lives. So we should look at it historically. NATO, in fact, a deterrent force before anything happens, so that you make nations to think about it. So uniting all these nations, as Matthew said, bring them together. Hopefully, we wouldn't have World War III. But then later, now in the year, this 21st century, people started questioning, do we really need NATO? Is it really functional anymore? In my view, it is. In fact, it's not only like the representation of this big tanks in the streets or the warplanes. NATO is something else. It evolved because the world is evolving, world is changing. Probably President Macron meant that. It's not deterrence against Russia, but against each other as well, because these two great wars gave a good lesson to humanity not to repeat it. So I look at it historically from that perspective.
Yeah, that's a great point. There's never been a war on NATO territory. Two NATO members have never gone into a full-scale war against each other.
Well, indeed, yeah. I think it's a good reminder to the world globally that actually these things should not repeat itself, because you're looking into like Great War, 10, 15 million people lost their lives. These are the official numbers, but many more got affected as well. Generations after generations. So from that perspective, I think the Ankara summit, Ankara meeting is going to be rethinking the role of NATO and what it is and how important it is to have it probably a little bit more modified.
Nancy, you've been nodding your head while Vebi has been talking. Look, one thing is that I think many people don't think it's that unreasonable of President Trump to tell Europe to take more responsibility for themselves.
Oh, I have to answer about
You don't have to answer anything. You
Trump.
can say whatever you want.
No, what I was thinking, I was nodding in that it's really important to do an exercise where you say, what if we didn't have NATO?
Yeah, that's a very good way of
So
looking at it.
how would that change the world? How would that change the landscape? Now, I'm a big believer in NATO because I've been working with the NATO Center of Excellence in Strategic Communication out of Riga, Latvia. We do a lot of research looking at asymmetrical warfare, the rise of artificial intelligence, and I really view NATO more in terms of narrative and the public outreach. And that's why I say, ask the public, if we take away NATO, are you going to feel less secure? That's really the question. It's a lot of open-ended questions here. But I think this Ankara summit, NATO summit, is so critical, not only because Trump and the team, up to 1,400 or more, are coming in his delegation, many members of Congress, but it's really taken on a heightened importance because of the President Erdogan, President Trump relationship. And Trump has often been rather dismissive of NATO, but I think if things go well here, I hope that it will capture the attention of the public. Because why spend all this money on deterrence, on an organization from 1949, if people don't really understand its purpose now?
Tunç, what about that question about Donald Trump's demands that Europe stand more on its own 2 feet? And Europe knows it. Mark Rutte, the General Secretary of NATO, he admits it. He says, we're in a seminal moment of the relationship we have with the country across the Atlantic. But maybe Europe is thinking that it's come too soon for us. We're not quite ready to do what the president wants.
So the main thing is about the collective defense for Europe side. Especially on the east side, it's very important for at these days because there are a lot of crises in world geopolitics, but especially Russia-Ukraine war is affecting directly to the Europe. And the Trump's demands for Europe, the increasing of the GDPs for the defense, and also the other thing is about the cooperation with all the NATO members, because at these days the main threat is not just about Russia. The deterrence for Russia is very important, but also the other threats for the Europe side, also the migration from the maybe the Mediterranean side and from the south, and the terrorist organizations are affecting some gaps, and terrorist organization using that gaps for the threat for the Europe side, and it's also affected to Europe for the migration to Europe, and this is the other main threat for Europe, and that's why the main defense structure of NATO should be improved by all the NATO members, and the Europe side is very important about that issue.
Let me just pick up on that, Tunç, because I think you make an important point, is that things have been weaponized that weren't before. Migration, for example. And you could say even that Donald Trump has weaponized trade more than trade has ever been weaponized before. I believe we have a question from the audience about what's going to happen and what will have happened by the time we record. You know, some of this, we don't know what's going to happen at that summit later this month. But we have a question from the audience about Trump's transactional approach and how that will sit with what the host of the summit, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, will try to do, which will be a much more collective approach, of course. Do we have a microphone for our audience member? Until we get that, let's get the microphone to the audience member. And Matthew, ask you about what Tunç is talking about. 5% is the demand of GDP to be spent by every member country. That's the demand from the White House. There are some nuances in that, 3.5% on hardware, 1.5% on other infrastructure, which could even mean building a road or a bridge. This is Trump's idea of 3.0. It's not that unreasonable, is it? Because the load that the Americans have taken upon themselves since the establishment of the organization.
It's absolutely not unreasonable at all, and it's long overdue. Burden sharing has been a fundamental concept of transatlantic relations for decades. And I mean, thank goodness that the Marshall Plan worked, and the U.S. strategy after World War II worked to help our European friends and allies recover and grow their economies and become what they are today, rich nations. So why in the world should the United States carry such a heavy percentage of the burden of providing largely for the defense of Europe? The answer, of course, has been this is collective defense, and after 2 world wars, as Professor was talking about, we came to understand in the United States that our security is truly intertwined. But the Russian war on Ukraine has been a huge wake-up point for Europe, and I think President Trump has actually played it well. I mean, I'm nonpartisan, I don't belong to any political party, but you know, for me, when I first heard President Trump saying what the Biden administration has done is all wrong and it's provided too much military hardware to Ukraine and economic assistance, at first I bristled at that and I said, that's completely against our own interests. But then this Trump approach has gotten Europe to wake up and say, we're in Europe, Ukraine is in Europe, we understand. We just need the transition, as you were saying earlier in one of your questions, Adnan, to go a little bit more slowly and in a way that we can plan. Rather than being a quick divorce, we need a transition. And I think that's a lot of what this NATO summit is going to be about. It's going to be about the European members of NATO delivering, implementing the pledges that they made in The Hague last year to increase their spending to 5%, and then to do that in a coordinated way, replacing those U.S. capabilities that will be reduced and withdrawn with new European ones. But that takes time.
Okay, I think we have the, thank you, Matthew. I think we have the microphone with the audience member. Just introduce yourself and who you are, and then ask the question. Go ahead.
Thank you. I'm Aleyna Ites. I am master's student in international relations. And my question is, President Trump's approach to NATO is based on a cost-benefit model for providing security services. On the other hand, Turkey, as the host of the summit, is playing the role of a diplomatic mediator, bringing the parties together. Do you think these two approaches will create a complementary balance for NATO's future operational capacity?
Okay,
Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Nancy, do you mind answering that one? It's about this transactional approach that Trump has, that presumably he will continue with at the summit, and how that will sit with the rest of the members, especially with the host nation that strategically in terms of communications is going to have a difficult time keeping everybody on side in private. In public, we will presumably only hear one line coming out. We're all together.
Right. Well, it sounds like with Trump, it's a big personality here. And so coming to Ankara, I worry that perhaps he will sort of become more of the story than NATO. And NATO really has to be the focus. So how this is going to play out, we don't know. There are several thousand media representatives, I believe, who are going to be here. I'm even covering the NATO summit for Nikkei and Nikkei Asia. So even Japan, all the years I've been living in Japan, they have been interested in NATO there for obvious reasons, having to do with their neighborhood. But yes, Trump is going to be a big picture in this process. We've already been talking about him, on the panel. All of us have addressed Trump.
But because he's involved in what's going on with Iran, do you not think that he may come here with a slightly more open-minded attitude towards his allies? I know he's annoyed with them for not allowing him to use their airspace or their bases to attack Iran, but still, surely this is the time where he needs his allies more than ever?
Well, it is the time, and if you look at public opinion polls, not only internationally, but in the United States, they're at levels that are almost comparable, the opposition to the U.S. attack on Iran to Vietnam War era.
Yeah.
So he's motivated by that. And I've studied Trump a long time. I told you before, I'm a Trumpologist. So somebody's got to do it, right? But, he is a fascinating figure. But I go back to having members of the public here, having academics and ambassadors. It's really critical that we all have a better understanding of this security alliance. And I'm not sure if we're going to get there. There's so many issues that are going to be covered. What will be the big story coming out of it?
Matthew?
Yeah, in response to your question, which is a great one, I actually think one of the things that binds President Trump and President Erdogan is that they both have transactional foreign policies. It's America first and it's Turkey first, right?
Right.
And if you just look at the relationship of Turkey and Greece, two critical NATO allies, Turkey is not at all hesitant to flex its muscles in the Eastern Mediterranean and show the rest of NATO that it has its interpretation of international law and it's going to defend it, even though that risks a diplomatic clash, not so much a military clash between Turkey and Greece. So I think this is something that will bring them together.
Yeah.
Okay, let's concentrate for the next 10, 15 minutes on Turkey's role within NATO. Vebi, give us a brief appreciation of how Turkey's role in the alliance has changed since it joined, which was 1952.
52, which is like 3 years after
Correct.
foundation.
Yeah.
I mean, more or less, it's like one of the founding members, obviously. But it's a very interesting. If you look at it historically, Turkey's role at times of heightened crisis or pressure, you realize Turkey trying to act as a balancing power in the region. So it's very interesting. It's a NATO member.
The region being Europe or the Middle East? Because Turkey is in both.
No, Eurasia and I should
yeah.
mention that. Yes, Middle East and Europe as well. But you can see, and there are sometimes you find historically again Turkey is hard standing. Basically, there are sometimes differences in thinking, but Turkey just trying to act as, especially. We are living in a region. Let me use here my university name, Ibn Khaldun's. He's a sociologist saying the geography is the destiny. But in fact, it is. So we know this geography very well. Especially we are surrounded with states where, like, for decades they're at war, like Iraq, Syria, etc.
Yeah.
So when you look at it, their balance is a balancing power in the region, historically contributing to NATO's mission or missions worldwide, globally, but at the same time trying to develop unique policies, especially so far as the Soviets concerned. And now the crisis, especially grain deal, we talked about it many times. Over there you can see that This grain deal, let me refer to it, a few years ago, it wasn't the European Union, it wasn't any other international organization, couldn't convince Putin. It was President Erdogan's telephone call with Putin just allowed all this grain to be delivered to the most needed nations, because there was triggering food prices, etc. So you can see that actually as part of NATO, Turkey taking it very seriously, but at the same time acting independently and sometimes delivering policies back to NATO and telling them let's act globally together. So from that point, Turkey has a very unique, in my view, position and maintaining it.
Just one real-world illustration of how important that Black Sea grain deal was.
Yeah.
One shipment of Ukrainian grain makes 40 million loaves of bread.
Wow. Yes.
In my kind of world, that means that 40 million families live for one more day. When you're that poor, one loaf of bread can feed an entire family.
But then let's, for the audience who don't know the details, just very briefly, if you allow me, because they couldn't take out the grain,
Correct.
they couldn't harvest the
Right.
ones
The next one.
because they
That's
didn't have
right.
anywhere to
Storage
to
space.
storage space.
Yeah.
Because they couldn't remove them from the fields, they were not able to plant new ones. So you can see
Yeah.
the scale of the disaster. Actually.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Tunç, Mark Rutte says that Turkey's defense industry has undergone a revolution. We know that European nations don't manufacture enough. The Americans have used so much of their equipment, whether giving it or selling it to Ukraine and using it against Iran. How important is Turkey's defense industry to the future of NATO?
The future of NATO. Actually, during the Cold War era, the NATO mainly focused on the protecting to territory.
Yeah.
But now we are seeing in the Ukraine, everything is coming from the different sides, and the threats are hybrid. And that's why we need to focus to the space, we need to focus on the digital systems, technologies, and the cyber security as well. So for the security of NATO and for the security of the global system, we need to all focus to the space, technology, and cyber security as well. That's why we need to work together with all the allies, and we need to build strong industries. We need to produce new technologies, and also preparing for the future threats. So the future of NATO needs to focus also to hybrid threats, as I
Yes.
mentioned before. What are the hybrid threats is non-state actors, and non-state actors bring more threats, more risk for the global trade routes, or for the submarine cables because we all know the Bab el-Mandeb is the main choke points for the global communication, and it's also important for United States, it's also important for the Europe security, and also it's all affected the global system. And as we see at the Hormuz in Iran, US and Israel war, it's also affected to a lot of things for the global system, and it's also affected the NATO. So that's why for the future of NATO, the main focus needs to be on the cyber security.
Yeah, absolutely. And we will come on to the future threats that NATO may face as we conclude this discussion. But as we're right in the middle of it, there's another question. I don't know if you, the audience, still have your microphone. There's a question that wants to be asked about the Turkish defense industry. Go ahead.
I am Aytekin Alp Çetiner, and also I am law in Ankara. And my question is about the NATO has long served as important deterrence organizations. Turkey is both a NATO member and major regional actor with strong military capability. How does the development of Turkey defense industry contribute to NATO's overall deterrence capacity? Thanks for it.
Who wants to take this one? One word that comes to
Here
my
we
mind
go.
is drones, but that's a very,
Yeah.
very specific and particular example.
That's
Matthew?
right.
Yeah, sure, Adnan. Yeah, great question. For decades, ever since the Cyprus-related arms embargo of the United States against Turkey in the 1970s, Turkey has recognized the need to reduce its dependence on the United States and other NATO allies' weapon systems because of the fear of embargoes, and there have been several others, right? And so, beginning around 20 years ago or so, the government here decided to make a concerted effort to develop its own defense industries, as you know. And they're world-class industries right now. They range from armored vehicles to aircraft, to unmanned aircraft, to sensors, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance systems. And they're cost-effective, so they're not expensive, and they're high quality. But Turkey has faced political opposition among some members of NATO, some European ones, who were worried about what I said before about Turkey flexing its muscles in the Eastern Mediterranean, for example. So France, Greece, Cyprus isn't a member of NATO, of course, but within the European Union and among European member states of NATO, it has influence. And so we now see, though, countries like Germany saying, we recognize how important Turkey's defense capabilities are. I had a conversation today with somebody from a Baltic state who was saying, we want to be less dependent on our other European allies and diversify our own supplies of weapons and defense technologies by embracing Turkish capabilities as well. So think back a year ago, and Turkey was saying it wanted to purchase the Eurofighter, and the European members of NATO were hesitant. But Germany stepped up first.
Yeah.
And Germany said, we should sell this aircraft to Turkey, and we need Turkey's defense capabilities as well. So there's more diplomatic work to be done for the rest of NATO to embrace Turkey's capabilities. Yes, Adnan, it began with drones, and Turkey first demonstrated how drones could revolutionize warfare way back in 2019, I think it was, when the Russian troops and Bashar al-Assad's troops attacked Idlib and violated the Turkish-Russian protection of Idlib. And it was Turkish drones combined with Turkish artillery that allowed the Turkish side to repel that attack. And the Royal United Services Institute in London, one of the world's great think tanks, wrote an article at that time saying, this is the first time drones have been used in this way. This is a revolution in warfare. This could make the main battle tank obsolete unless all the sorts of electronic countermeasures are developed. And that was Turkey that broke that fundamental ground. And now it's gone on to develop many other technologies.
Thank you very much for the question. Nancy?
Yeah, I couldn't be more sort of, my mind is spinning as you're talking, because this is all hard power. And I think we're leaving out soft power, which of course, if you understand, soft power is about the attractive, nonviolent aspects of countries that include what is pulling people's interest to visit these countries. There's so much discussion about weaponry, and I'm afraid that you sort of lose then the public interest in what is the purpose of NATO. You've got 32 countries, 32 cultures. They all have different priorities. They all seem to be coming up with different weapon systems. And aren't we as a global public community becoming a bit war weary? We've already seen this in Iran. We don't want this war anymore. So NATO, maybe I'm wrong, but I thought NATO was defensive, was about a security alliance to protect against a threat. So do we have different narratives here?
No, it's the same. To deter, you have to be able to defend. And the big threat is Russia having chosen a war against Ukraine. And a lot of frontline NATO member states, somebody was mentioning the Baltic states, are really worried that they're going to get invaded next. So you have to prepare to defend yourself or you'll get beaten up.
Vebi?
Well, can I just mention, although it's not NATO related, but this the Turkey's defense industry actually creates a public excitement, so much so that we realize in many aspects of that industry, our young generation wants to study at universities. That is increasing the level of research and level of applicants, the quality of applicants, etc. So it's very interesting. You can see that it's not only drones and going defending or attacking, etc. But you can find it's still kind of a really, I'll call it again excitement, but this is more than that. When they make this kind of fairs displaying their developments, because many of them are developed by Turkish engineers, it becomes a matter of pride as well. So that I can see also reflecting Turkey's role not only in NATO but as a regional Eurasian power. So it's not only drones, etc., but from the soft power perspective, our higher education also taking its share.
The thing is, Nancy, you're right. There are 32 different cultures, right? You could almost say that there are, I pick a number, many political differences, different philosophies of about how you govern a country, how you relate to the outside world. Leaders have their own ideas. And when Matthew mentions the Eastern Mediterranean, I think back to a few years ago when France and Turkey, with their current leaders who were there at the time, they were very upset with each other. The French were trying to claim some territorial waters in the Mediterranean, and Turkey was saying, but you're so far away from there, and Cyprus is thinking about exploiting a certain economic zone, and Turkey is sending its drilling ships into those parts of the Mediterranean. And yet these are important allies. How do you set aside the political differences with the reality of being collective members of NATO?
Oh, you're asking
Anybody. There could be a question
actually,
for setup, because this is a kind of research academic issue almost.
Right.
So each country has own priority, as you mentioned. So, and also the different interests. So the interests should be maybe different, but the main threats are important. How the threats are affecting two countries and how they will react, and this is the important thing. So it's not maybe good for the common decisions in NATO, but also despite the different views and despite the different dynamics, different interests, different priorities, the main idea or main mindset is about common deterrence and common defense in NATO.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, let's, if we come back to Turkey, of course not a problem because it's the host of this year's NATO summit, but to move on and to look at NATO's future. Vebi, give us again a historical perspective. Have you ever known the alliance to be in such difficulties because of the differences of opinions?
Well, I think no. The answer is no. The reason historically I'm looking at it is a bit different, because the change in the past, let's say in the 60s, in the 70s, in the 80s, was slower than today.
Is
Today
that because the Soviet Union was still in existence and that was the very reason for NATO being
because
formed?
we're living in an age of speed now. I mean, everything is
Yeah.
changing momentarily. It's so much. And I think as a big, great, well-established institution, NATO, to respond to that change is creating a little bit of pain, if I use that word.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not really easy to respond. Responding to what? What's your function now? There's no Soviets anymore. I mean, what would be your function? But there are many, as Tunç was listing, and here the speakers are listing, there are many more challenges that did not exist in the past, especially the artificial intelligence, and you have non-state actors. And they're also trying to master that. I mean, what's your response to this? I mean, how much investment you need, and sometimes before even you get to the funding, the world changes again and there's something else in front of you. So I think these kind of institutions maybe should be more practical. I don't know how, I don't know the answer, but they should be more responsive to the changes, changing global threats, and but it's not always easy. I think that's why we have a lot of anger and anxiety about making decisions, because you don't know how long your decision is going to be valid, because again probably by the time you implement it, the threat is not there and developed or evolved in another matter and another threat. So I think that's what the sufferings and the pain come in, and that's why this summit extremely important. As Nancy said, probably President Trump will steal a bit of the picture, etc. But in the essence of this meeting, probably they will be discussing what are we going to do, how are we going to respond to these changes. I mean, it's not always easy, but they have to do it.
Matthew, isn't it just the natural result of a multipolar world? The fact that it's easier to disagree?
It is, and I actually think, looking into the future for NATO, I'm very comfortable with where things are going. I'm not comfortable with, as I was saying in the beginning, with the credibility of the U.S. connection to the transatlantic community, but I'm comfortable in the fact that in this multipolar world, there are other countries that wield tremendous influence, and the European members of NATO have really come together now. They've unified, like they haven't in quite a long time, not only about the need to increase defense spending, but about the need to act together to deter Russia first and foremost. And they're taking on responsibility for European security as European countries. And the European family, or the European Union, or the European members of NATO, I mean, that's the wealthiest place on earth, the biggest GDP taken together of any group of countries, right? And so many people, a larger region than the United States, 400 million people or so. So it's natural that the Europeans are coming together and are going to play a stronger role in security and, of course, in soft power. And it's long enough since the end of World War II, since 1945, to be the predominant member of what is the most successful political military alliance in history. But it's time for the Europeans to become one of those multiple poles in the world.
Nancy, I know you look as if you want to say something,
I
but
definitely.
I'll just interject and say
Not
that
against you, I agree
maybe
with
the
him.
Europeans have been forced into their hardened position. We have heard over the past, 9 months or so, European leaders say things about an American president that they would never have said in the past. When Friedrich Merz said that Donald Trump has pushed America into humiliation by launching the war against Iran, there are words being said almost in anger directed at Washington from Europe. Maybe Trump is forcing Europe to do what Matthew was saying, come together.
Well, not just European leaders, but citizens in general,
Correct.
including this citizen. So when we were talking about weaponization earlier, there's been a weaponization of language
Yes.
under my president as an American. But I want to get back to NATO as really a brand, if you don't mind.
Interesting.
And my forthcoming book, called Battleship Diplomat, is on the USS Missouri. And the USS Missouri came to the Bosphorus in 1946. Subsequently, you had the Marshall Plan, you had the founding of NATO, you had Greece and Turkey receiving aid under the Truman Doctrine. All of these are really important to tell in this origin story, because if we're going to look at the future, we have to know the past. And we're asking the right questions, which are, do we really need NATO now without the Soviet Union? I mean, I think there's not a whole lot of really good understanding about the different roles that these countries take on. As I said, I've been living in East Asia, so this is new to me to be in this part of the world. But that's why I think it's so critical, Turkey's role right now at this time, on the cusp of a very fragile peace process over Iran and the Strait of Hormuz. Will this be a reprieve, or will this sort of become something linked to the war? It's really hard to say.
Yeah, let's see what the summit produces on that front. We have a question about future threats that NATO may face. I believe if you still have the microphone, just pass it to the lady in front, and just give me one moment, because I want to ask Tunç a question, because Tunç, you've been pushing this about the future threats that NATO faces. You mentioned migration, you mentioned terrorism outside of NATO territory. There's also cyber warfare as well. In the research that you have done, is NATO ready for all of those? The migration issue has been there for at least 10 years now. We know that terrorism is a historical fact all over the world. Cyber warfare is something fairly new. How prepared is NATO?
Actually, the main security threats are now increasing for NATO, and it will continue. And NATO will be ready for all of it, if I am not wrong, and I am expecting to that. But especially on the Sahel region in the Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, it's out of NATO. I know that. It's not directly affected to NATO security, but indirectly it's affected to Lampedusa in Italy. It's very close to the Tunisia, and also there is a Quetta in Morocco. Also it's affected to Spain. So that's why the southern side of NATO directly will affect from these threats. And on the other hand, from Horn of Africa to the Sahel region, there are a lot of crises in this region. Sudan war, Somalia, and there are some counter-terrorism in Somalia, and Turkey is giving a lot of support to Somalia for counter-terrorism in this time, and it will affect to the security of the Horn of Africa, Eastern Africa and all the continent, but also its effect to the all the global system, because the terrorist organization in Somalia, they are connected with some other Al-Qaeda groups in Sahel region, and they are acting together in some way. And the Sudan is the heart of the Africa, and the crisis in Sudan will affect all the African side, and it brings a lot of security threats for all the continent. And all these issues are affecting to the southern side of the Europe, and that's why the illegal financing issues and drug issues and terrorist organization, and they will push the people to migrate to the Europe.
Yeah.
And this is the main crisis of Europe, and it's also main crisis for the NATO. So how Turkey support to the security of NATO when we coming back to do that? So Turkey is bringing some stability to that country, and Turkey giving a lot of support on the defense side, security side. So the Turkey's production on the defense industry, it's really brings some stability to the from Somalia to the Sahel region, and it's very crucial for the the NATO countries in Europe especially. So the Turkey has the second largest army, but it's important. But for the future of NATO, the drones, the tactical weapons, tanks, helicopters, and the navies, the unmanned navies, the ships and the etc. So these are all important for the security of NATO.
Okay, ready with the question. Thank you, Tunç.
Thank you. My name is Zahriani Arman, Master Student in International Relations. My question is, NATO was originally designed to deter conventional military threat. Yet today, environment of security is shaped by cyber operations, hybrid warfare, energy and information weaponizations. Has the alliance is adapted quickly enough to this situation, gray zone situations, and in this context, how Article 5 be applied to these challenges? Thank you.
That is a fantastic question.
Right.
I mean, at the end of the day, we may have countries that don't have the physical military might to defeat a larger opponent. But cyber warfare can balance that imbalance in the military power that those two opponents may have. How does one confront this while regarding Article 5 as the crux of NATO? I mean, I don't even know how to begin to answer this question, so please help me, Nancy.
Well, you and I talked weeks ago about the Iranian Lagos videos. I mean, if those aren't an example of sort of this equalization of non-state actors.
But that's softer power, Nancy, of course, right?
Well, but it's also messaging. It's the narrative. So it is related to Article 5, but the thing about the information space now is that you could have a huge military, but if you're able to manipulate in the information sphere, then you're equalizing it. And I don't know if NATO is prepared for this. This is why I like working with the Defense Strategic Communications Journal, because we address this all the time. And the journal is public, it's for everybody, but it's produced by NATO. So NATO does get it, but as far as all 32 member countries, I mean, you know, there are a lot of other countries outside of NATO. I think the NATO 32 cover about close to 1 billion people. And I wanted to mention China too, because I've taught in China for over almost 20 years at Tsinghua University in Beijing. Tsinghua University is #1 in the world in artificial intelligence research. So we've got to, in terms of education, we've got to start making advancement in this. Science, technology, not be so threatened by it, but understand it. And it's going to require a lot of contemplation and reflection about again, the purpose of NATO, is it defense of democracies? Is it a defense of these non-state actor threats? It's all of it.
Yeah.
But you cannot let go of the whole information, propaganda, persuasion space.
Matthew, the very nature of cyber warfare may mean that we don't actually know what's happening. You can't hide a tank that easily. You can't hide an aircraft carrier that easily. But in terms of cyber warfare, maybe probably we don't even know 10% of what's happening. Do we have any idea of how prepared NATO is for that kind of warfare?
Yeah, I think NATO's pretty prepared for that. I mean, it's had for the last 15 years a center of excellence for cybersecurity in Estonia. The Estonians are world leaders on things digital.
Yeah.
And yeah, the cybersecurity is a massive focus of all of the defense ministries, and especially of the United States one. But still, you raise a good point. I mean, as former Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld once said, right? Essentially, we don't know what we don't know. There are
Another
known,
Donald.
there are unknowns,
Unknown
unknown unknowns.
et cetera,
Yeah.
I love that. I use it all the time.
But what you started again with Nancy was sort of the sorts of tactics in warfare now,
Yeah.
hybrid and other, the asymmetric ways to apply military force and ideas that allow much smaller actors to have a much greater impact. And innovation, technological innovation is a huge part of this. We see that Ukraine, just in the last 4 or 5 months, has figured out how to be the world's leading developer of, innovator of, and applier of a wide range of drones and anti-drones.
Yeah.
And if you watch carefully what's happening on the battlefield on Ukrainian territory by Russia, Russia is losing now because of Ukrainian drones and because of Ukraine's information warfare inside of Russia. By attacking oil refineries and pipelines in Russia, we're seeing shortages all across Russia now of fuels, of petrol, of diesel, and it's starting to have a political impact. So this is an instance of where technology, military technology, is affecting the way people are thinking about the war, and there's information warfare and going on as well. Cyber is a big part of it, and all of this coming together with strong support from NATO allies may turn the tide in Russia and get President Putin finally to realize, I have to end this war.
Yeah.
You also asked about environmental issues, and so I think NATO was focused on the environmental threats we face and global warming, but that has taken a back seat, especially since President Trump has come into office. He's pushed way to the side, and even he's called climate change the climate change hoax. So now, after Russia invaded Ukraine the second time in the full-scale invasion, President Trump has said that the United States needs to focus on the Western Hemisphere and let Europe take care of Europe. As Russia continues the war, and now the war, the U.S. chosen war in Iran with Israel, I think NATO's focus now is much less on those environmental threats for the moment, and much more, for better or for worse, on these hard military, technological, and idea bits of power.
I would say that would be the immediate target, because in my philosophical brain, I'm looking ahead to 50 years' time. And when we're talking about migration and we're talking about the environment, when cities and countries are 60 degrees for 6 months a year, how much is that going to change migration? Maybe NATO will have to rethink how it assesses the climate crisis.
It will.
Well, I just read an article. I don't know if it's true, but by 2035, around 42 million immigrants expected to arrive Europe.
There you go.
Even half of it,
Yep.
half of it is or quarter of it. Imagine how the impact of it. So I think NATO's future role should be carefully reassessing the developments, including environmental issues and environmental crisis, climate crisis, and predict, hopefully, I know how difficult it is, but predict hopefully that they can play an important and vital role and acting, because in public mind, I know Nancy, how public views NATO. Well, in 50s, 60s, 70s, it was the armies, isn't it? Armies designed to fight against armies, right?
Yeah.
But then what happened in 1990s and the year 2000s? ISIS came up, and there's no army in front of you. Who are you going to fight with these guys? And let me say this, they literally occupied, controlled two legitimate countries, Iraq and Syria,
Yep.
and Mosul for many years. And many countries didn't know what to do with it
Yep.
because there is no army. I mean, you bomb who you bomb. We don't know even where they are. We still don't know where they are. Therefore, I'm not promoting them, but therefore, I think from now to 20 years, and it's extremely difficult. I tell you, extremely difficult. But they have to do it. Otherwise, what's the point being such an organization and such an important and necessary organization?
Correct. And by the way, ISIS, as we also know, is Daesh.
Yeah.
If we go back to conventional threats, Vebi,
Yes.
you've mentioned earlier that why is NATO even there when the Soviet Union isn't there anymore? But obviously the Americans, it's been from probably Barack Obama's time and Joe Biden and Trump as well, they're refocusing towards the Indo-Pacific. They see
Very
China
Trying
as
to.
their main threat, as the main threat to the
Huge,
US.
yeah.
Does that mean, therefore, Vebi, that China is the main threat to NATO as well, if the Americans regard it as the main threat to Washington?
Well, yes, as a founding principle, they had to create a threat. It was Soviets.
Yeah.
But I don't think NATO should keep themselves busy with inventing and
Yes.
reinventing enemies. You see, it's not a good policy in my view.
Yeah.
China can be a good trading partner, good in robotics, as you said.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's true again, but apparently Q1, one of the world's best publication standard, let's say,
Right.
Q1 Plus, there were 90,000 articles written on robotics. And guess what? 72,000 of them were
Were
from
written in,
China.
yeah.
Exactly.
So this is very important. China is not anymore a country who is taking a glass and inventing or making it better and cheaper.
Right.
They are in fact invested heavily in innovation. So that's where US probably seeing it as a threat. But in fact, instead of seeing China or Europe, different parts of the world as enemies, we should see them how, as humans, we can cooperate for a better future. I think NATO's role should be, in my personal humble opinion, very much focusing on this. Yani, let's act together without any threat, etc. But I think NATO's role functioned very well as being keeping as humans ourselves healthy is cheaper than treating the disease. So
Yeah.
therefore, NATO's role is that before these threats emerge, probably they can act on it to unify the nations as well as globally all the other nations. So that including China, that including US and Europe as a whole.
Okay.
Can I
Yes,
just add,
please.
I think you've given the best argument for the rebranding of NATO because I'm already sensing
Yeah.
there can be more engagement, there can be more connection to NATO. I'm very pro NATO, so to listen to you talk about sort of being healthy and keeping yourself healthy and well and taking care of the environment, that can be part of the function of NATO. I'm getting a better picture here, and I think that's something the public can relate to better too.
I think we've only got a couple of minutes left, so I'm not sure exactly how to end this, but Vebi is indicating that NATO almost has to have some kind of threat to justify its
Yes.
existence. I'm putting words in your mouth, Vebi. So, Matthew, maybe we should end with this. Will NATO feel more secure once the Russian president's name is not Vladimir Putin? Or does it suit NATO to have Russia as that opponent?
I think NATO will be much more secure when Vladimir Putin is no longer the president of Russia, but when a successor doesn't have the same ambitions as he does. This NATO summit is about deterring Russia. It's not about any of those other things.
They will talk about Ukraine a lot.
Overwhelmingly.
Exactly. Yeah.
This is what NATO is. It has a function now. It is deterring Russia. That is its overarching objective now. Previously, 10, 15 years ago, or after September 11th, there was a cliche. It was the beautiful Senator Richard Lugar, the former chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, who used to say NATO needs to operate out of area, meaning out of Europe, or it's out of business. That it's over. It is now, NATO is all about deterring and therefore defending Europe against a hostile Russia. When that war in Ukraine is over, and I think Russia has lost, and Putin is starting to understand that, then NATO will need to figure out what it does with itself. Maybe it will simply focus on environmental issues, on strengthening itself, on being healthy, on supporting economic development, education, exchange of ideas. But on the 7th and 8th of July, the focus is entirely on deterring Russia and implementing the commitments made in The Hague last year to bring defense spending up to 5%, as you mentioned in the very beginning.
Yes, that agreement was reached in The Hague, and yet there are still just 3 or 4 countries that the records show have actually spent far, far more than the other members, and that will also need to be redressed, that particular balance. Tunç, I think we might be out of time, but I can give you 30 seconds.
Okay, so including to Ambassador Matthew, so the spending money is very important, but it's not enough. And you need to build a strong capability,
Yes.
and you need to integrate with all the country of NATO members with your capacity, by the way. So spending money and increasing the defense budget is important, but you need to be effective on the defense industry side.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That is it. I told you it would be 57 minutes in as real time as possible, and it's gone really quickly. Audience, thank you so much for taking the time. You could have been doing so much more on a lovely evening like this, but you chose to spend it with us. Thank you so much indeed. Tunç Demirtas, thank you so much. Matthew Breiser, Nancy Snow, Vebi Baisan, thank you so much. And to you, the audience on TRT World, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed it. Take care.